I'm Wesley O'Dell, and I'm a professor, visiting assistant professor of politics at Washington and Lee University. I'm also an alum of W&L, originally raised in West Virginia, and I consider myself an alum of the Marshall Foundation as well.
Wonderful. And what attracted you to applying to the Marshall Undergraduate Scholars Program while you were a student at Washington and Lee?
Well, it was advised that I apply by one of my advisors, Professor Theodore Delaney, a longtime professor of history at Washington and Lee. I fell in love with history when I came here, and I took it very, very seriously. And it was only a sophomore when he advised that I take a look at this program, and I was so attracted to the notion of a long-term, sustained, independent study project that would lead crucially to the production of a long paper. That's something that is a tremendous skill set to develop, the ability to analyze data in long form, and we're talking 80 to 120 pages. That was a truly unique opportunity to be offered to such a young undergraduate, and it ended up shaping my entire academic scholarly career.
That's great. And what did you research during your time with the program?
So I researched George Kennan, who was the author of the containment doctrine during the Cold War. I looked in depth at his time as a diplomat prior to the end of the Second World War. And then crucially, I looked at his time at the State Department, where he served as General Marshall's key advisor, actually. They held adjoining offices with a connecting door so that Kennan could get in to see Marshall whenever he wanted without going through secondary staff. From this, I developed a conceptual series of pillars that held up Kennan's containment doctrine, its different conceptual undertones, its components that made it what it was. And I looked into how Marshall and his thought and his leadership helped to influence Kennan's understanding of containment. It ended up being 120 pages. It was great fun.
That's great. And also, you continued to have a relationship with the Marshall Foundation, working on the Marshall Papers project as well. Could you introduce the Marshall Papers project for people who might not know what that is?
Certainly. The Marshall Papers project is an attempt to examine the broad sweep of the early 20th century through the life of one truly remarkable and significant man, General George C. Marshall. General Marshall held key positions in both world wars. He was a Secretary of State and a Secretary of Defense. And by looking at his correspondence with other figures, both important, like Winston Churchill or Stalin, as well as his more personal correspondence, you can come to really understand the man, and crucially the times that the man lived in. And so it was a remarkable opportunity to place oneself backwards in time and to understand what history was like through the lens of those who lived it and how they wrote about it at the time, crucially.
And can you talk a little bit more about what you were actually doing with that project, how you assisted with it, and what you enjoyed most about the work you did on the Papers project?
Certainly. So I was a research assistant working under Sharon Rittenauer Stevens and originally Larry Bland before he passed away. These were two tremendous Marshall experts. They were assembling the different letters that were going to be published by Johns Hopkins University Press in the volumes. And it was my job to assist them in their research and crucially to write footnotes, explaining and contextualizing some of the elements of the letters that might not be immediately perceptible why they were important to the readers of the volume. So I would look up individuals that he referenced, and I would look up things as insignificant as a different song that Marshall particularly liked that was referenced in the letter. It was Buttons and Bows from Paleface, the musical. I would look up Marshall's relationships with celebrities and non-political figures that Dr. Bland or Ms. Stevens might not actually know about themselves. And then I would write footnotes that explained who these people were, referencing what Marshall was doing at the time, how he knew them, and why he was talking to them. It was a wonderful way to get to know the General's mind through his own writings and through the web, the networked web of fascinating individuals that he spent his time corresponding with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as a professor at Washington and Lee, what courses are you currently teaching?
So I teach global politics, which is a combination of international relations and comparative government. Every term I'll teach a couple of sections of our introductory global politics course. And I currently have a 300-level seminar on global politics as themed through the writings and life of Winston Churchill.
And are you able to incorporate the George C. Marshall or the library and its resources into any of your courses?
Absolutely, I am. In all of my global politics courses, including the introductory courses, some mention of the Marshall Plan as a foundation of contemporary liberal international order is a must. The Marshall speech is assigned to most of the courses that I teach, including last year I taught a course on the foundations of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That is, of course, a spiritual descendant of the Marshall Plan and of General Marshall's tremendous leadership during the Second World War. More deeply, my time with the Marshall Papers Project has tremendously influenced how I approach global politics and history writ large. My idea for my Churchill course is essentially a copy of what I did here at the Marshall Papers Project, using Winston Churchill's writings instead of General Marshall's. We're fortunate to have great published resources on both of these individuals. And then more deeply, how I live my life is in part attributable to the lessons that I learned from observing General Marshall. He was a tremendous letter writer. He wrote many, many letters. I write many, many letters today because I was convinced of its value from my time here. Right after I left the Marshall Papers Project, I went abroad for my master's degree. And I actually courted my wife by writing letters. To this day, I write my friends letters and I copy Marshall's style. He had a charming, abrupt little style of addressing people as my dear Eisenhower or old Eisenhower as his salutation. I do that myself today. In watching his relationships with people, great and small, big and little, I've come to realize the importance in this digital, fast-paced age of continuing the old traditions of taking time to place on paper sentiments, thoughts, and to communicate in that fashion. And so scholarly, my scholarly background is deeply influenced by Marshall, and also personally. He's a tremendous role model in so many ways that extends beyond politics to more deeper and more human things.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to add or that we didn't cover in both questions?
Really that this facility is a tremendous resource to scholars and to citizens. The Marshall Foundation and the research library attached to it offer us windows into the past and crucially into a key juncture point in history, in the history of international relations, in the history of government, in the history of liberal internationalism. It is best understood by getting back to the raw stuff of the individuals that built the order that we continue to live in today. And this is not something that should be an insight confined to scholars, but instead should extend to all citizens of the United States, and indeed citizens of the world that Marshall, people like Churchill and FDR, built in this period. It is always a good idea to stay close to the insights that they had, because they still speak very much to us today.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure.